Hello world historians. Last time I left you where we're going to pick up along the Silk Road, and we're looking at again the images of the Buddha. And just to refresh your memories, it was some 600 years after the death of the Buddha that we first start seeing these images of the Buddha on initially on coins, which I think is a very interesting statement, because on the one hand you have the image of the Buddha. On the other hand, you have the image, or the other face, you have the image of the king, in this case King Kanishka, who was a contemporary of Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire, and again a Buddhist ruler, but Buddhist Hellenistic, because you also have the Greek influence. And I think it's very interesting to see this Greek influence along the Silk Road through Alexander's conquest and through the Hellenization of Asia. This part of the world as well, of course, is modern-day Afghanistan, somewhere that we would associate perhaps with the rule of the Taliban. And here you can see the image of the famous Buddhist statues at the area of Bamiyan in Afghanistan, which were in 2001, actually just shortly before 9/11, were destroyed by the Taliban. They actually charged them with explosives and destroyed not one but two of these giant statues, and you can see here the human scale for comparison. Now, the reason that they did this was again a kind of historical amnesia, if you like, or a willful forgetting that these were seen by the Taliban as kind of religious idols, and therefore as a sort of insult to their form of Islam. But it's worth pointing out that in the regions of the world where Islam began to open up, there were already great saturation of different world religions: Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, which were circulated along the Silk Road. So it's interesting to see all of these sort of different layers of culture and history come together in a place like Afghanistan, even where you have groups of people like the Taliban who are trying to eradicate those layers of history. And again, in the same region of the world, Afghanistan, in 1970, there was a archaeological discovery at a place called Ai-Khanoum. And these images I'm going to show are from a book called The Greek Colony at Ai-Khanoum and Hellenism in Central Asia, and this was written by a French archaeologist called Paul Bernard. But if you see these style of columns, which is called a Corinthian column, this is very much a kind of late classical Greek style of architecture. This could almost be late sort of 4th century Athens, but it happens to be in the middle of Afghanistan. And this is essentially the furthest east that anyone has discovered a fully intact kind of Greek settlement, a Greek town. And rather like the later Roman Empire, the armies of Alexander the Great actually had what was, historians would refer to as a kind of model plan for their cities, and they actually established cities along a kind of similar street plan and layout, a kind of standardized model that was spread throughout the empire. And this one happens to be in Afghanistan, but you find other examples stretching all the way back, of course, to Greece itself, but also to Persia, to modern-day Iraq, to Egypt, and all throughout Central Asia. This is, a little bit more detail there, but you can see there was once a fairly extensive palace structure. And again, this archaeological discovery was made in 1970, which in Afghanistan was a period of relative peace before the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. And really, since that time, the country of Afghanistan has been in a state of continuous war. So it's been very difficult for archaeologists to get back into the country and to work safely, as archaeologists were able to do in 1970. Here are a couple more details. What's interesting about the so-called Fountain of Oxus, which was actually built into the city walls in the period just after Alexander, is you can see this gargoyle kind of spigot is still running after thousands of years. You also have here a kind of Greek theatre and a gymnasium. Of course, the Greeks were very keen on their physical culture as part of their way of life. And just some really beautiful artifacts here from Ai-Khanoum, including a massive remains of a sandaled foot of a cult statue, a ceremonial plate with a representation of the Greek goddess Cybele, and a statue of Hercules, the great Greek demigod who at least Alexander the Great claimed to be descended from. So these are again very much Greek items, but this is not Greek in the sense of geography, and the people who probably traded these items would have been from a very diverse cross section of the world. This was basically a kind of cultural melting pot that we're talking about here with the Silk Road. And you can see these influences even assimilated into the Buddhist culture that Alexander himself would have encountered along the route of his conquests. He would have almost certainly have seen, for example, the great statues at Bamiyan, but these are much later, somewhat smaller images of the Buddha. But you can see that they still have the classical kind of Greek emphasis on the drapery, and the reason that the Greek sculptures used to have these sort of very elegantly draped figures, male and female, in their statuary, is it was a way of sort of expressing their artistic virtuosity. But again, there's a combination here, not just of Greek elements, but also Indian elements. The head of the Buddha is very classically Indian in terms of the different features. For example, the sort of flame-like protrusion on the top of the head representing Buddha's spiritual qualities. There's a certain Greek quality about the face, and I don't know how clear this is from the image, but I think what's interesting is that this is one of the few images of the Buddha where he seems to be wearing a kind of mustache, which seems to have been the kind of local custom in that region. And it wasn't just Buddhism as well that was circulating throughout the Silk Road. One of the other religious movements that we start heading eastwards was actually Christianity. And this was from a gravestone in China around the year 800. And this is 800 CE, not BCE, and you need to think about that one for a second. But this is called an illustration of the kind of syncretism of Buddhist, Confucianist, and Christian culture that you find in China as early as 800 BCE. And these were a sort of group, if you like, a kind of subsect of Christianity called the Nestorians, who originally followed a Middle Eastern theologian by the name of Nestorius. But Nestorius was actually expelled from the Middle East under the Roman Empire because his religious beliefs, particularly concerning the divinity of Christ, were seen as heretical. And so some of his followers, rather than abandon their beliefs, actually traveled east on the Silk Road and became missionaries. So thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years before the first European missionaries arrive in China, you have the assimilation of Christianity into Tang Dynasty China, and you see things like this Chinese tombstone, which combine the image of the cross and the image of the lotus, the classical Chinese motif. But in the next module, I wanted to talk about another culture that flourished along the Silk Road, which can really be said to be the great empire of the Silk Road, the Mongol Empire. And this was an empire which was founded, of course, by Genghis Khan, who was associated with the extremity of his warfare. But it's also worth pointing out that rather like the Persians, the Mongols were great assimilators of other cultures, and that they ruled the greatest empire in world history, an empire that stretched from Central Europe in the west all the way off the map to Korea and even to the fringes of Japan during the height of the Mongol Empire. So this is going to be an extension, if you like, of our focus on the Silk Road, taking us into next week's module. Thanks very much.